The following program is a presentation of Wyoming Public Radio, the Wyoming Business Report, and Wyoming PBS. From the campus of Central Wyoming College, Decision 2012, the U.S. Senate debate. Hello, I'm Richard Ager of Wyoming PBS, and welcome to the Decision 2012 Senate debate. With me are MJ Clark, editor of the Wyoming Business Report, and Bob Beck, news director at Wyoming Public Radio. And we are all here to provide you, the voters, a chance to see and hear the candidates. And those are the ones who want to have your choice when you mark the ballot next Tuesday. The contestants will face questions from our journalist panel and later on from each other. And right now, we're going to be determining the order of our candidates, and we will now introduce our candidates in the order in which they pick the winning number. Our first candidate is going to be Joel Otto, and give me a moment here because there's always some kind of complication. Country Party candidate Joel Otto lives in Lander on his family ranch. He has worked as a design engineer and was active in the Republican and Libertarian parties before joining the Country Party. Our Democratic Party candidate, Tim Chesnut, is an Albany County Commissioner. He has worked extensively as a professional photographer and as a staff member of ARC Regional Services, which provides assistance to the developmentally disabled. And the Republican Party candidate is Senator John Barrasso. He is a physician and former president of the Wyoming Medical Society. He was appointed to the U.S. Senate in 2007 and re-elected to that post in 2008. He is a member of several Senate committees, including the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Welcome to all of you. Well, our first question to all candidates: why are you running? And what are your qualifications to serve as a U.S. Senator from Wyoming? You have 1 minute to respond to this question. I will be beginning with you, Mr. Otto.
I'm running because I was concerned that we weren't seeing real solutions to our spending problem in the country. The federal government is facing serious spending problems, which there have been debates about whether to increase taxes or cut spending or what. But we have a $1.3 trillion deficit. In addition to borrowing money, there's a fair amount of printing going on. And so I'm running because I really feel like we're going to have to cut some federal programs before they cut themselves.
Over to you, Mr. Chesnut.
I've been an Albany County Commissioner for 14 years, and I think when I looked at who was running or not running, I thought I was hoping someone would step forward like Governor Friedenthal, but that wasn't happening. So I felt maybe somebody at the local level could bring a fresh new approach to the Senate. I think what my qualifications are is when I'm in a room with people in a contentious issue, I seem to have a calming effort to bring people together. I think my sense of humor and levity, I hope to bring that to the Senate. I think that's been lost since Al Simpson's been there, and I hope maybe a calming effect to bring maybe some folks together because the hyper-partisan system that's not working there now.
Well, perhaps that could help with the proceedings tonight as well.
Absolutely.
Senator Barrasso, to you.
Well, thank you. And first, I want to thank Wyoming Public Television, as well as the folks listening at home in Wyoming Public Radio. I want to thank all of the students who are here from college here in Central Wyoming, and so the studio audience and folks that are taking time to watch at home. I also want to thank the people of Wyoming for the privilege that they have given me and given my wife Bobby to represent them in the United States Senate. People know me as a physician. I practiced medicine in Casper for 25 years, taking care of Wyoming families. And they know me from being the medical director of the Wyoming Health Fairs, trying to bring low-cost health screening to people all around the Cowboy State. Additionally, from just trying to help in the state for things like the Jerry Lewis Labor Day Telethon. So that's been a real privilege to work with people from all around the state. Then I had 5 years of experience in the Wyoming State Senate, which is a real opportunity to learn more about the issues facing people, facing our state, and continue to work through that. The greatest privilege in the State Senate was being one of the 4 original co-authors of the Hathaway Scholarship, improving the lives of the people of our state. I promised at the beginning I was going to run a positive campaign about the future. I've done that and will continue to work for the people of Wyoming.
Thank you very much. Well, we're now going to go to the journalist question part of the debate, and each candidate will, of course, face a question by a journalist. The candidate has 45 seconds to answer, and if there is a follow-up question, then the candidate will have 30 seconds to respond to that one. And I get to begin. So our first question begins with the topic of health care. Mr. Otto, this one is to you. The Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, has already done the following in Wyoming. There are 6,000 young adults under 26 who now have coverage under their parents' health care plans. There's no more lifetime limits for cancer patients or other chronic diseases. And there's no more denying coverage for children with pre-existing conditions. And that will extend to adults in 2014. Why do you suppose so many citizens of Wyoming oppose the ACA, and do you?
I oppose the ACA because I see it as coming between patients and doctors. What I really think we need to do is get a relationship where patients and doctors are choosing their own care rather than having it chosen by a distant organization. I mean, federal government is about as distant as it gets and still is acting here in Wyoming. And when you mentioned all those statistics of people who are covered, yes, they're just being covered, but what are they covered by and how are they covered? I mean, how is this plan going to work out? I think we're going to see some degradation in the quality of care. I think we're going to see that covered doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as what we think of as covered. It's not this cure-all where, oh gee, all of a sudden now they have great health care. I think we're going to see some real problems as this moves forward. Plus the expense is really extreme.
MJ, we'll go to you for the next question.
Okay. Mr. Chesnut, also on health care.
Emergency rooms in this country are mandated to provide care to everyone, even if they have no insurance or cannot afford the care. Most hospitals make up the cost by charging the rest of us $10 for an aspirin or inflating other costs. Since we and our insurance companies are paying for the uninsured anyway, doesn't it make sense to require that everyone get health insurance and share the cost? If you disagree, what's your plan to pay for the care of those without insurance or means?
No, I think that's absolutely true, and I think that's, and going back to the other question, I think he answered a lot of the questions. I think it's part of the Health Care Act. People just don't understand what's going on. I think part of the broken system is that people are using the emergency room as their health care. And I think with where Senator Barrasso was talking earlier about the Wyoming health fairs, we need to be doing preventative maintenance. We need to be doing screenings. I think with one of the things when I became a county commissioner, you don't realize that you're going to have to become an expert in health insurance. And so we put preventative health care and maintenance into our health plan, and I think that's where we need to go in the future, where we can take care of a lot of these problems before people have to use the emergency room as their primary physician.
Thank you.
Bob, next question.
Senator Barrasso, medical expenses are the leading cause of bankruptcy in this country, and according to a 2009 Harvard Medical School study, 78% of them had health insurance. Now, no matter what happens with the Affordable Care Act, the question would be, what are you going to do to make sure that health care is affordable and available to everyone?
And you know, that was what the president promised. When you take a look at the broken promises and why this health care law is still so unpopular across the country, is what the president said is he wanted to actually drive down the cost of care. People, instead of seeing their premiums drop by $2,500 per family, have seen them go up. And if you ask any town hall meeting, do you think that you're paying more? They say yes. And you say, do you think the quality and availability of your care is going down? And they all agree with that as well. We need to focus on the cost of care. This health care law really did nothing to do that. It ignored the whole issue of defensive medicine, the tests that doctors order to help prevent suits or protect themselves, does nothing about junk lawsuits, and really does nothing to lower the cost of care. It's why for 25 years I've been the medical director of the Wyoming health fairs, to provide low-cost screenings for people.
Quick follow-up. So what will you, though, do to make sure that we can get this affordable health care?
Yeah. Well, number one is that I've introduced legislation called the State Health Care Choice Act to allow states like Wyoming and other states to opt out of any of the components of the president's health care law that they think is actually going to raise the cost of care in their states. And I would like Wyoming to have those opportunities. But when you get Washington doing a one-size-fits-all, it generally doesn't work for rural America, and specifically for Wyoming.
I should mention these first three have all been healthcare questions. We would like to extend the ability to respond to the question on the part of all candidates. So as we move forward, we will pose the question to a particular candidate, but then we will go around the panel and see if any of you would also like to respond to that question. So we will now continue with the next question for Mr. Otto, and that is from you, MJ.
Thank you. Mr. Otto, this is on Social Security. One of the suggested ways to make Social Security solvent is to reduce benefits for those of us under 55. Since the current workers pay for the benefits of retirees, I assume that we will still be expected to pay for the benefits of those over 55. What makes you think that the younger half of the population will agree to pay for something that we may never get to use?
Social Security went out of surplus in 2010. It's a pay-as-you-go program. And so the idea that Social Security is something that somebody is putting in that's going to be saving for their retirement is just simply not true. The Social Security system is a very large part of the budget, and it's an unsustainable part of the budget. It's estimated that Social Security benefits, Medicare and Social Security benefits, could take up to 85% of GDP when the baby boomers are fully retired. So I think with Social Security, what we really need to do is do means testing. It's not popular at all. But if we're going to protect the people that really need protection, I think we need to do means testing. And I think really that Social Security is a bad system. It's a Ponzi scheme, and it should be ended. And these responsibilities should be transferred to the state and local and community levels.
Mr. Chesnut, would you like to respond to the question?
Yeah, I just think with Social Security, we need to be looking at maybe raising the age of when people can go on Social Security. We're living longer right now, and I think that's where it's going to tax the system. And I think we also need to raise the caps on Social Security. I think that when they set those caps during the Reagan administration, that put an artificial ceiling on it, and I think people at the top percent need to be paying their fair share.
And Senator Barrasso.
Well, you take a look, the Social Security is a sacred trust. People that are expecting that deserve to have that, who are over the age of 65. You talk specifically about people under the age of 55. When you look at the math today, 10,000 baby boomers, Americans, turn 65. Yesterday, 10,000 turned 65. Tomorrow, 10,000 are turning 65. And what's that is happening was, it's not just, as you say, it's not just Social Security, it's Medicare as well that we're dealing with the expenses. We're looking at two tidal waves coming at us from an expense-wise, and we're going to have to take a look at it for those people under age 55 and make those changes, which ought to be part of an overall tax reform in the system, and look as well as Social Security and at Medicare.
Bob, next question to you.
This one is for Commissioner Chesnut. How do we address the Medicare side of this whole entitlement issue? How do we address the shortfall there without harming those who have paid into the system? And maybe following up on a point or two we just heard a second ago, what's so magic about the age 55 that we have to look at that?
And I think that's probably part of the problem. I mean, we're living much longer than we were when that artificial age was set. I think we need to probably be looking at going up to maybe 62 or even higher than that. Again, I think we need to be raising the caps. I don't think people are paying in. It's kind of a broke system. I will be, if I'm elected to Senate, I'll be one of the only people that qualifies for Medicare and Social Security disability. So I think I can bring a different approach to it. I have never accepted, my mom got me qualified for SSI when I was in the 80s, and I've never accepted that. I want to work, and I think most people do want to work until they can do this. I think most Americans really want to be fair and pay into their fair share and work as long as they can. I think the people that are abusing the system are few, and I think that's part of it's just it's thrown out there too often that there are so many people doing that.
Senator?
Well, one of the issues in terms of both with Medicare is the President's health care law took over $700 billion away from our seniors on Medicare, not to strengthen Medicare, but to start a whole new government program for other people. And when the President says, well, we've extended the life of Medicare, it's only because under his proposal, at the end of this year, in 2 months, reimbursement to doctors and hospitals is supposed to drop 30% and then keep those rates frozen for the next 10 years. And it's going to be very hard for seniors to get to see a doctor under those circumstances. So we have to say, if we want this to go long term, we need to look at those under age 55.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Otto, your thoughts on the question posed?
Well, could you repeat the question?
Sure. How do we address the Medicare shortfall without harming those who have paid into the system for many years? And as Senator Barrasso said, a lot of the focus on changing things has been focused on under the age of 55. And what's magic about that?
Well, I really think that what we need to do is protect those that really need the protection. I think there are people in that program who are adequate, they have their own savings, they're going to be okay. We need to protect the needy. That's really the first thing. And what we have right now is a system that's failing. And it's going to fail across the board. It's not going to fail just for the people that don't need it. It's going to fail for everybody. So we really need to look at this system as far as how we can protect the needy. And I'm sorry, but the money isn't going to be there when you say 85% of GDP. It's going to fail, and so we really need to look at that.
Thank you. And the next question is for you, Senator Barrasso, on the role of government. Many have said this election is about a choice. what is the role of government? And I wonder how you answer that question, and do you think your answer might be different if you were wondering if your pharmaceuticals were safe or if you were facing the aftermath of an earthquake or a Hurricane Sandy?
Well, I think the role of government is to keep us as a nation safe and free, and that is the fundamental role of government. I think that right now government is spending too much, borrowing too much, and growing bigger every day. And I know people in Wyoming, as I travel the state, know what works. It's low taxes, it's reasonable regulations, and it's living within our means. So all this excessive spending has to stop. Since this debate has started, we've probably borrowed about $30 million, a lot of it from China. You can ask any of the college students where we're borrowing the money from. We cannot stay a strong nation, an independent nation, if we continue to have that kind of debts to other nations where their best interest and our best interest are not well aligned.
But isn't it not true, though, that it seems that there will be criticism of too large a federal government until we actually need it? One example might be Republican Governor Chris Christie, just this week, of course, making very effusive and grateful comments about the role of the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the federal response to Hurricane Sandy.
And it's a lot easier, I would believe, to handle those sorts of emergency responses if you're a state like Wyoming, where we balance our budget every year, where we don't have a debt, where we have money for rainy day, like this.
So you think all states are equipped for that?
Well, I think if you have a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, live within your means, don't spend more than you have coming in, as a nation we're going to be a lot better prepared to deal with emergencies when they arise. But when you have a $16 trillion debt already, to then go out and borrow more money on top of that, I think puts us further in debt and more in jeopardy.
We'll move along to Mr. Otto.
The purpose of government, according to the Declaration of Independence, and I really like their definition, is to protect our rights. We have pre-existing rights. The purpose of government is to protect those rights. I mean, really, that's the primary thing. Beyond that, there are some other roles. When I entered politics, it was very strange. I haven't been in politics, and when you're not in politics, if you need to get something done, you negotiate. You work it out. And if you don't work it out, then you don't do it. And government has a different way of doing things. Basically, they take money and they threaten to put people in jail. And so, if you want to apply those things to solving social problems, it doesn't work so well. It works pretty well with the military, with the police, and the courts, but I think that that's the purpose.
Mr. Chesnut.
Well, I think part of what's broken with government, not only are we spending too much and using the money in the wrong ways, we've got too many special interests that are running the government. The pharmaceuticals, oil and gas industry is spending so much money to buy and pay for the government. Senator Barrasso is accepting thousands and even millions of dollars from outside interest to run his campaign, and it's hard for me to believe that those people that their votes aren't bought and paid for, especially when you're talking about healthcare debate and talking about energy policy, when most of your payroll is coming from those interests.
Thank you, Mr. Chesnut. And the next question from you, Bob.
Mr. Otto, we're frequently told in this state, and I don't know if you've ever heard this, but I certainly have, that we really do need a Republican to serve, especially in our Republican majority in the House, but to serve in the Congress because we need to get our ideals out there. But when you look at the loss of this abandoned mine land money that was stripped from the budget, should that cause us to doubt that?
Well, we have a very strong Republican constituency here, and if I were elected, I would caucus with the Republicans. But we're a small state. There's 100 senators. There's 535 representatives. We're not going to be able to dictate terms in Washington. We have to work. We have to cooperate with the people that are there. And what we have with the mine land money being stripped is we have a federal government who is overspending. They are overcommitted. They are running out of money, and they're going to do whatever they can to try and get money wherever they can. So I really think that the problem, it goes back to this big problem of the government is overspending. We need to cut these programs that are insolvent, and I think rather than focusing on one little problem, which is a big problem for Wyoming, we really need to cut the federal government.
Over to you, Mr. Chesnut.
With the abandoned mine funds, I think Wyoming is part of the problem with that. I think when you have a fund that's set up to mitigate the abandoned mines, you spend it on that. And we made the mistake of spending that money on the Arena Auditorium this year. And we were used as a poster child to strip that money out of there. And so I think when you're doing government and you're not spending the money the way it's supposed to be spent, then you lose the confidence of the people.
Senator.
This money was in a trust fund. It was stripped away in the dead of night behind closed doors in a heavy-handed way by a Democrat-controlled Senate. We are continuing to fight every day to get that money back to Wyoming. That money belongs to the people of Wyoming. It's from the minerals of this state, and I can tell you our entire delegation is not going to rest until Wyoming gets that money back.
It came out of the Republicans on the House side, though, didn't it?
It came out of it was funding for the transportation bill that came out and from the Senate Finance Committee with Max Baucus, the senator from Montana.
We'll move to our next question, and this one is addressed to you, Mr. Chesnut, and that is, the president has been widely criticized, largely by Republicans, for rising gas prices, but two things. By all accounts, the U.S. now is in an oil boom that may soon surpass Saudi Arabia's output. And second, oil is a global commodity, which means we always pay the world price, even if we can double our production. Would you put a priority on greater energy extraction, or what restrictions would you put on it?
Well, I think, and you talked about the president being criticized, I think the president has shown that they're expanding where we're drilling, we're expanding, we're going so much further than they were going during the Bush administration, but the Republican side wants to frame the argument that we're not, that we're restricting that. I think we need to be looking at everything where we need to go for oil and gas, but I also think we need to be looking into the future that we're a very smart people, and we're going to have to be looking at changing the way we're doing energy in the future. We're going to be coming up with energy cells and things like that that may make the fossil fuel energy obsolete in the next century. So if we at Wyoming aren't at the forefront of trying to look at new technologies, we're going to be left behind here. And so I think right now we are a colony that is pulling all these resources out of here, and if we're not looking to the future, we're going to be left behind.
Okay. Over to you, Senator Barrasso, and actually you're of course on record as really criticizing the president for rising fuel prices. And I'm wondering, I mean, how would you go about making gas go back to $2 a gallon?
I think we ought to be exploring for more American energy on federal land in Alaska and in the Gulf. The president has blocked a number of these areas, and so much of the increased production is on private land. We're seeing that in North Dakota. I think energy security is part of our national security, so I would have approved the Keystone XL pipeline to bring energy in from Canada that the president has blocked. But all of us want to make energy as clean as we can, as fast as we can. We want to do it, though, in ways that doesn't raise the cost for American families, and we have incredible resources in Wyoming that need to be protected.
Over to you, Mr. Otto.
Well, I think we're seeing fuel prices rise, but we're also seeing is the dollar going down. I mean, we have a situation where we're printing vast quantities of money, and the inflation, the money supply is really not a very interesting thing unless you sort of follow it. But what we have is there's been a vast destruction of wealth through the housing boom and bust, and at the same time we have the government inflating money extremely at a very, very high rates with these quantitative easing programs, and even for the last 10 years. And so when you say the price of fuel is going up, it's like, well, going up relative to what? It's going up relative to the dollar, which is going down. And so if you had the Federal Reserve stop printing so much money, we probably wouldn't have such high prices.
Thank you very much. MJ, you have the next question.
I do. Senator Barrasso, you've just said that excessive spending has got to stop. According to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, in 2011, the officially reported United States military budget was $740 billion, much more than the next 9 largest military budgets combined. In fact, not one of the 9 even breaks the $100 billion mark. And taken together, they amount to about 2/3 of the total U.S. military budget. Do we really need a military that is 7 times larger than any other nation's?
We need a military to keep us safe and to keep us free. And the whole goal of that, and you take a look at the expenses and the amount of money, is I'm not the one to make that decision, but we're asked to vote on it. I listen to the men and the women in the fields, to the generals, to make sure that we have what we need. As the leader of the free world, we are under attack in ways that no other countries are. We've just had this negotiated strategic arms reduction talks and the president has set his reset button with Russia. I think it was a mistake. I think we've given things up that we should not have given up, and I think that does jeopardize our security. And I'm going to continue to fight for national security that protects us and keeps us safe, and especially after 9/11, and you see what happened there. But even today, we see what happened 9/11 of this year with Al Qaeda and Libya.
But do we need one that's 7 times larger than the nearest nations, even China's?
I'd have to take a look specifically at those statistics. China is building up their military at a lot faster clip than we are. They now have warships. You take a look what's happening around China and in the Pacific with the threats to Taiwan, to Japan. I think that we have to be very cautious in terms of any kind of cuts you're going to do to the military. Is there waste? Yes. Can you cut spending? Yes. But to go with these proportions that you mentioned, I don't necessarily agree with that.
Thank you.
We'll now go to Mr. Otto.
I have to disagree with Senator Barrasso a little bit on this one. I think it's 7 times bigger than the next largest military is much too big. It's about 19% of the budget. The military is a very important part of government. In fact, it's one of the true legitimate roles of government. But what we need is a military that can protect this country against invasion, foreign invasion. For instance, with the 9/11 attacks, it was a bunch of people, but it wasn't a foreign invasion. And so we responded with invasions. It was really a police action. And I think that in order to protect this country better, we should be focusing on better intelligence and more individually focused protection.
Your views on the role of the military?
I again vehemently disagree with Senator Barrasso. I think the military will work within the budget that we give them, and we are way too large. The manpower, we need to cut the military through manpower. We're facing different things in the 21st century that are going to have to be dealt with through technology more than manpower. We don't need to be the policemen of the world. We don't need to be in all these places in the world. I think Americans agree with that. We need to honor the military. We need to be looking at how to be paying these guys when they get home and taking care of them when they get home, rather than putting millions. We have the largest military in the world. It's ridiculous.
And MJ, we return to you for the next question.
Well, the follow-up question actually builds on Mr. Chesnut's comment. America has been called the world's policeman. Do you agree with that assessment? And is that really a role that we need to play? Senator Barrasso, yes.
I think that we have to make a decision of what's in the vital interest of the United States, what's important, and then what's humanitarian. We cannot fund everything for everyone. And I would want to focus on the things that are in the vital interest of the United States.
Well, Bob, I think it's over to you.
This is a question for Mr. Otto. Is equal pay for equal work an issue for you? And if so, what at the federal level should be done to enforce it?
You know, I've looked into equal pay for equal work, and I don't think the studies are very good. I mean, I think that people should have equal pay for equal work, but when I've looked at the way these studies work, they'll say, well, a secretary working at a desk is equal to a truck driver driving a truck, and so they should be paid equally. They're not equal pay for equal work. They're talking about equivalency, and the equivalency studies are fairly unfair. But I do think that equality is very important, but I think the market can take care of that. I don't think a business is going to pay somebody less. If they're going to pay somebody less, then they're going to go somewhere else. I really don't think there's a role for the federal government in interfering in private contracts in that way, or even the state government.
Mr. Chesnut.
Yeah, I think equal pay for equal work is very important for me. I don't know how the federal government is supposed to enforce this, so because we need to be comparing apples to apples. I think, unfortunately, in the debate that went before the Senate and House, they decided to play games. I think the Democrats put forward a bill and then tacked on things that the Republicans, there was no way they were going to back. It was just a move to make them look bad. So I think we need to quit playing games on these things. I think the only industry in America that women are paid more than men is the pornography industry, and I think we need to take care of that, because there's just something basically wrong with that.
Well, Senator, being from the equality state, this must be a sensitive question. What do you say on this?
Well, I think Mr. Chesnut, Commissioner Chesnut has it absolutely right in terms of what happened in the Senate. That's exactly the way I saw it, and I agree with him.
Well, we'll let it go at that then. And I'll take the next question, and it is back to you, Mr. Chesnut. Around the nation, we are seeing a widespread reconsideration of our marijuana laws. The vast majority of Americans in most polls consider the war on drugs a failure, and so do most chiefs of police. Neighboring Colorado is now voting on legalizing marijuana. Should we be following their lead?
Well, thanks for throwing this softball to me. Absolutely. I think prohibition has never worked in this country or in this world on any product. We're turning a blind eye to the fact that there's marijuana being smoked on every corner in this country, and why are we not taxing it and taxing it and using that revenue? President Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex. Now it's the prison-industrial complex. Prisons are one of the largest industries in this country. We're doing these mandatory minimums. We're putting people away for growing marijuana and possessing marijuana. And the fact is, we should be giving these people community service rather than prison, and putting these people to work rather than throwing them in prison.
Senator, we're spending an estimated $25 billion a year on the war on drugs. Is that a good investment?
Well, I'm opposed to legalization of marijuana. I see it as a physician as a gateway drug. I've taken care of people in the middle of the night in the emergency room who've come in because of drug abuse and then injury and accidents as a result of it. You can get into the specifics of how much money we spend and incarceration rates, but I oppose legalization.
Over to you, Mr. Otto.
I agree with Mr. Chesnut, and I really think that we need to add to that. I think one of the problems we have with the drug war right now is that drugs are only issued by licensed physicians, and so what you have is it's very difficult for instance, I have a medical condition that requires a very mild prescription, but I have to go to a doctor every single time I want it. It's like, I don't want to kill myself. I'm not going to take dangerous drugs for that, and I think almost everybody is that way. So I really think we need to look at liberalizing the drug laws. I'm not sure whether total legalization of all drugs is the way to go, but I really think we need to look at particularly harmless drugs like marijuana.
Bob, over to you for the next question.
Senator Barrasso, what's the proper balance between the federal government and states when it comes to education? As an example, should there be federal standards and requirements? And I know some people even want to get rid of the Federal Department of Education. I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
And Mike Enzi, the other senator, is the ranking member, hope to be chairman of the Health, Education, Labor and Pensions Committee. Spends so much of his time on education. When I was in the state Senate, I always believed that the best decisions were the ones made closest to home. And the thing that impacts on students more than class size is the relationship between a student and a teacher. When you have a teacher and a student and a parent working together, two parents, I think that's the best way for that student to learn. Do we want accountability? Do we want results? Do we want the best education? Students are going to have to be able to be competing internationally. So I think that's critical. But I like what we've done here with the Hathaway Scholarship, so that every student here in Wyoming, by keeping their grades up and staying out of trouble, can get a college education.
Over to you, Mr. Otto.
Yeah, I'm a homeschooler, and I have 4 kids, and they're all from the same mom and the same dad, and they've grown up the same. But they learn very differently from each other. And I think as their different learning abilities and interests need to be recognized, and the same thing, teachers teach very differently from each other. So when we have federal standards that say how teachers can teach and how students can learn, I think it's a really terrible idea. Even further, as a homeschooler, you look at what is communism. Communism, and I hate to get into the C word, is the government owns the means of production, and that's what we have with the schools. And so what we need is competition in schooling, competition in education, and we'll have a great education.
I think where the federal government comes into this is bringing the best parts of the states together. I think we in Wyoming, teaching on a rural level, are learning things and teaching our children in different ways than they are in urban settings. So I think where Wyoming is doing very well in education now, we can be teaching the other rural states that, where some models in especially Louisiana and New York are doing amazing things in urban schools. I think those need to be, the federal government needs to be kind of the broker to get those out there, to find out what's going on in those settings and getting the information out to the local governments.
And MJ, you have the next question.
I have the next question. Mr. Otto, you know these debates are possible because of public broadcasting. It's the shameless plug time. Wyoming Public Radio and Wyoming PBS are the only way in Wyoming for people statewide to get a range of news and high-quality programming, and it costs each of us about $1.35 a year. If elected, would you vote to eliminate federal funding for public radio and public television and all the services they bring us?
I'm really happy to be here tonight, but I have to disagree that it's not the only place to get information. I think that right now we're in a phase where we can get information very easily, many different ways, tailored however we like to get it. And I do applaud your efforts to do this voluntarily, and I think that's the way to do it. I don't think you should do it by taking things from people, and I don't think it should be funded by taking and threatening to put people in jail. So yes, I would say let's end federal funding, and I think that you would see that all the happy listeners and all the happy viewers would be happy to fill in the slack.
I hope so.
Over to you, Mr. Chesnut.
Absolutely not. I think if you look at the statistics and you look at the actual reality, public television and radio are the most balanced information you're getting. In doing television and radio interviews, you see that so much of the local stuff is focused on the weather, not the news. The public radio and public television are actually giving us information about what's going on in the world and in America, and not just focusing on kind of fluff pieces and the weather. It's more about news and information than it is about advertising.
Senator, you get the last word on this one.
Well, Wyoming Public Television and Wyoming Public Radio play a very important role in our state, and many of us here tonight contribute to both and appreciate what you do. If you take a look at overall spending in the United States, this has to be part of the discussion.
We'll leave it at that. And I do get the next question. It is to you, Mr. Chesnut, and it is about the fiscal cliff. Because whoever wins this election will find themselves facing the consequences of the sequestration deal that was struck earlier this year, and those include, of course, deep cuts in Medicare and defense spending. I'm wondering what you would agree to, what combination of tax increases and spending cuts in order to break the gridlock and prevent the country from going over that cliff?
Well, I think we've talked about this throughout. I think we're looking at with Social Security and Medicare, we need to be maybe upping the ages on those. And with defense spending, I agree with Simpson Bowles about 10% cuts in military. I don't think we can take anything off the table. I think, as Senator Barrasso knows, you can't know until you get to the Senate what strategic spending we can cut. But I think we really need to be looking about how we're spending money overseas, how we're propping up some governments with some of the billions of dollars we're giving with overseas spending. And I think we need to be looking at some of the fiscal programs. You see. I think just even micromanaging the budget with travel, with first-class travel, things like that. I think there's a lot of places. I think the UN needs to be another place we need to focus. We're spending way too much money on the UN. We need to let the rest of the world pay too.
Thank you, Senator. I'll just add a comment that State Senator Cale Kay sent in on this question, which was suggesting that perhaps the Senate could do something about its cloture rule that requires 60% of a vote.
There are two separate questions. One with regard to the fiscal cliff. I don't think you should raise taxes on anybody at economic times like this. To actually, what you want to do really is raise tax revenue overall. And the way we do that is getting people back to work. We're at almost 8% unemployment now. We have been for over 40 months. What you need to do is cut through the government red tape and the rules and regulations that are making it harder for small businesses all around Wyoming to hire people. That's the way you actually get more tax revenue in, by getting more people to work. So I am opposed to the president's approach, and he wants to raise taxes now.
Just to clarify those, so you would not agree to any tax raises in addition to spending cuts?
Well, I'm opposed to raising taxes on anyone in economic times like this. Generally, what we need to do is increase revenue by getting more people working.
Okay. Over to you, Mr. Otto.
Yeah. If we raise taxes, it's not going to do the job. If we raise taxes, we're going to probably reduce revenue. I agree with Senator Barrasso. This is not the time to raise taxes. Really, we're just going to have to, and really the best gain is to cut regulation at this point, because that doesn't cost anything. And we can see the economy start to grow. For instance, working on the ranch, if I want to hire somebody to come work on my ranch, help me dig some ditches, if I'm going to do them as a full-time employee, forget it. It's just not worth it, particularly with the new health care law. You just don't want to do that kind of thing.
Bob, you have the next question.
Senator Barrasso, a lot of, as we talk about cuts, a number of things are being proposed, and one of those cuts that I've heard some talk about is research dollars, things for science, and knowing the research that's done at places like the University of Wyoming for the state of Wyoming, I'm curious your thoughts on that. Would that give you any concern if some of those dollars were taken away?
Well, it would give me concern, but I think what we've seen is a lot of wasted research dollars. The president had his green energy agenda, and we look at Solyndra, $500 million of taxpayer money wasted. You say, well, how did they choose Solyndra? Well, it was one of the president's big contributors. There have now been over a dozen of these projects where the president has made bets on green energy. They have all been bankrupt. So I think very concerned with when the government decides to pick winners and losers. But we need to be investing and focusing on research on clean coal technology. We have an incredible resource here in Wyoming with coal. We're the Saudi Arabia coal. We want to make it as clean as we can, as fast as we can.
Mr. Otto.
Yeah, generally I would agree with Senator Barrasso, except I think it might go a little bit further and say, the grant writing process, what you select to do your research on, it's all very stilted, and the people who are getting the money don't necessarily have any skin in the game, so they don't necessarily research something that will be productive in the end. I really think that private individuals, companies can really come up with the money for research, and it benefits all of us. Clean coal technology will benefit all of us, and the coal companies are doing quite well. They can afford to do their own research.
Technologies and R&D is where we should be focusing our money. That's where, with the funding that we gave NASA in the 60s and 70s, brought the computer age about in what we're doing. Neil deGrasse Tyson talked about if we put 1% of our GDP towards NASA and those type of things, we would be pushing our economy so far in the future just by what we're learning and how much faster we can make the computers and the technologies. If we don't spend the money on technologies, we're going to be left behind.
Well, the next question, this is on the environment, and it's for you, Mr. Otto. Do you accept the large body of research pointing to climate change with consequences similar to the drought that Wyoming went through this year?
The climate change research is very complicated, and I'm not a climate research scientist. However, and I heard Senator Barrasso mention, if we cut all the carbon emissions of this country to zero, carbon emissions would still be increasing in the world. And so I think we need to look at things, and if there's something we can change, we should do it. And if there's something that we can't change, we should maybe focus our environmental protection efforts somewhere else, like into deforestation or garbage in the oceans, because I really feel like it's counterproductive and a waste to try and cut CO2 emissions. My understanding, being an amateur, is that it's the sun that does it.
Mr. Chesnut.
Yeah, I agree with, I think science in general, the science community agrees that we are affecting climate change. I think people, the eyes of the world are going to be upon us with this DKRW plant, with carbon sequestration and the way we're going to try to do clean coal. There's a lot of clean coal research at the University of Wyoming that's going on. If we can kind of take a dirty commodity and make it usable and clean, that's where we need to go. And I think that can be a big step into reducing what the man-made effects on climate change are.
Senator, what's your take on the science that has been done and how that should help shape public policy?
Well, I mean, the climate continues to change. The role of man in that is still unknown to what degree this impact has been there. But we need to focus on energy security, economic growth, and environmental stewardship. And I think we do it beautifully in Wyoming in terms of using our energy resources and doing it in an environmentally sensitive way. When you take a look at reclamation that has resulted, and those are the things that I'm going to focus on, which is making energy as clean as we can, as fast as we can, but not raising costs for American families, which hurts their quality of life.
But do you honestly believe we can have it both ways? I mean, I think the bulk of the scientific evidence does point to at least a large role for man-made emissions in speeding along this change.
Well, what Mr. Otto just said is what I've been saying for years, is that if you just shut off the United States tomorrow, with the emissions that are happening in China and in India, emissions are going to continue to rise for years and years to come, even if you take the United States out of the mix. And with China's military growing right now, their economy continuing to grow, they're approaching ours. You take a look at that and say, is this what we really want to do? Hamper our own economy, hamper our own economic growth and economic security, when globally it would have essentially no impact.
Well, not to belabor the point, but aren't those two questions? One is the question of whether the research shows a man-made effect, and the second, of course, as you raise, the effect that it could have on our economy.
Well, I would not jeopardize the U.S. economy, and I continue to fight against and vote against pieces of legislation like the President's cap and tax law related to carbon.
MJ, you have another question?
I have the next question. This is for Mr. Chesnut. Mr. Fulton's senior American government class over at Lander Valley High School sent us a bunch of questions, and here's one of them. Where do you stand on the issue of abortion and contraception? What about in the case of teen pregnancy, rape, or incest?
I agree with the Roe v. Wade decision. I think it's a decision that's been made, and it's the law of the land. I think putting restrictions on these things is just it's a waste of time in the government. I think this is a woman's issue. I think I joke, like I say, I talk about putting levity in government. I say no vagina, no vote on this issue.
Thank you. Senator Barrasso?
I'm pro-life. I vote pro-life. I have a 100% pro-life voting record with right to life, and then there are the exceptions.
For rape, incest, teen pregnancy?
The life of the mother.
The life of the mother only.
Thank you.
Mr. Otto?
Yeah, I sat down with people basically on both sides of the issue, and I talked about them for a while because there are consistent arguments that can be made on either side. It's a personal right, and it's a life that you're ending. I believe that life begins at conception, but I believe the only way we're going to get justice on this is to allow some compromise. And I think the compromise is going to involve decision at early, maybe first trimester, and then restrictions late trimester. Late trimester, late-term abortions are really horrible. And I think that there's a role for the state to stop that murder.
Well, we're going to go to the next part of our debate, and it's going to be a candidate-to-candidate questioning. And in this part, of course, each candidate will make a question or inquiry of both of the other candidates. So the order in which we're going is the order in which you picked numbers. And so, Mr. Otto, you can begin with a question for Senator Barrasso. You have 15 seconds to pose the question, and Senator, you would have 1 minute to answer the question. Same rules will apply for all combinations.
I guess my question is about the Patriot Act and the NDAA, both of which you voted for. The Patriot Act allows surveillance. The NDAA allows indefinite detention. They're stripping basic constitutional rights. I'm wondering how, as a conservative Republican, you can justify that.
Yeah, I did vote for the Patriot Act and the Defense Authorization Act, which dealt specifically with paying our troops. There are a couple of components to that, Section 1031, 1032, which have to do with enemy combatants who happen to be U.S. citizens. I believe that these have been read and interpreted a number of different ways. I read them that if you have a member of al-Qaeda who is also a U.S. citizen, and that person were on 9/11 arrested before that plane, if they could have stopped one of the planes into the Twin Towers and arrested that person should not be read the Miranda rights, shouldn't be treated as if they had just held up a 7-Eleven store, but that person ought to be treated as an enemy combatant and tried in a military tribunal.
Do you have any follow-up to that?
I'm a little bit surprised that you don't feel that the Constitution provides adequate powers of prosecution. You feel like the Constitution needs to be suspended in terms of those cases. I'm surprised about that.
Any further response to that?
Well, no, we've had lengthy discussions and debates on the Senate floor on this. I'm very comfortable with my vote. It's an interesting discussion, but I think people are reading more into it. And I've lay out the language, read it clearly, and it doesn't say that to me.
Our next question will be posed by Mr. Chesnut to Mr. Otto.
I guess with the third-party movements going on right now, where do you see the third-party role playing a role in government right now? And where you're looking at no government, how does that play into the whole scheme of things?
I'm not sure what you mean by no government, but as far as looking at the third-party role, I think it introduces ideas. It introduces, I wouldn't be here tonight if it weren't for third parties, and I'm able to ask challenging questions and introduce new ideas. The idea that we should use government very carefully. We shouldn't necessarily think that using private industry or voluntary thing is the same as threatening to put people in jail or taking their money. I think that there's two different ways of doing those things, and when you're threatening to put people in jail and taking their money, that you should have a very serious, you shouldn't just do this for frivolous causes like putting up parks and that sort of thing.
Our next question will be for Senator Barrasso to Mr. Chesnut.
Just interested to ask about your view of our Second Amendment rights, and I'm a strong advocate for Second Amendment, for our right to own and bear arms, and I think you have a different take on that. So I'd just be interested in your thoughts about having a state-to-state discussion.
I really do. I really agree with the right to bear arms. I think I have guns myself, and I think that's something that is a freedom that we enjoy in the United States. But I also think that one of the wonderful things about the Constitution is that there are it's amendable. And I don't think the Founding Fathers could envision what the weapons that we can have right now are. I don't think that necessarily that we should be able to have nuclear weapons and bazookas and things like that. And I think that's where a lot of the gun rights people want to go, that they should be able to have anything they want. I think some of these large magazine clips and some of the cop killer ammunition, I don't think we need to have those on the streets. And I think states' rights, and especially where I think the Washington, D.C. decisions where they wanted to limit those rights, I think they should be able to do that on a local level and a state level.
Our next question will come from Mr. Otto for Mr. Chesnut.
I guess I don't know your particular ideas on gay marriage and that sort of thing, but is there some concern with gay marriage advocates that there's a slippery slope of extending it to, say, polygamy or changing the age of consent? And I also wonder, you mentioned community standards with firearms. Do you feel that there's maybe a role for community standards in marriages where, for instance, Wyoming should be free to ban it?
I think that's a fair thing for the communities should be able to regulate that. But I'm personally, where you guys both are talking about where government should stay out of our lives, I think they should stay out of our bedrooms. I think I agree with same-sex marriage. I agree with those things. I don't think I think things are done on a more logical level where no one's talking about polygamy, no one's talking about marriage between a man and a horse. I think this is a silly part of the argument. I think where same-sex marriage is involved, I very much support that, and I think gay rights are paramount in what I believe where government should stay out of our bedrooms.
When you say sorry, can I go ahead? When you say the government should stay out of our bedrooms, and yet the gay marriage would require that employers, say, for instance, issue benefits because somebody is married somebody gay, where they would not want to do that. So that's the government actually stepping into a private contract. Do you feel that there's a role to keep the government out of stepping into that private contract?
Well, no, because I think that's I think that's social life. I think where people are married and whatever those things are, that's just part of the role of society, not government. And I think where those play
that the last word on that.
Okay.
You do get the next question. We're running tight on time. It's for Senator Barrasso.
Okay. One of the things that concerns me about you is the money that you're spending on the campaigns. I think the Citizens United decision was wrong, and I know the Supreme Court agreed with that. But I heard a joke recently that I'll believe a corporation is a person when Texas executes one. Don't you think it's kind of embarrassing how much money you're spending on this race? I mean, the cards are already set.
You're out of
okay, sorry.
Well, I'm actually proud that over 2,200 citizens living and working in the state of Wyoming have wanted to contribute to my campaign. That says to me they are happy with the job I do. They want to encourage me to do that. I was in the state Senate for 5 years. People knew how I voted. They know how I vote in the U.S. Senate, and if they want to then contribute to my campaign, I'm happy to take that. But I'm going to continue to represent the people. So many of these political action committees are made up of people who actually live and work in Wyoming.
And Senator Barrasso, you get the last question. It is to Mr. Otto.
Okay, thank you. Just curious, because I think I read that you had said that you thought that energy independence for our nation was overrated, and I'm so focused on energy and making sure we have affordable energy. Why would you think it's overrated?
Well, I think that interdependence is a good idea. I think they say that when nations are trading with each other, and I thought about this one because Wyoming, within the United States, is an energy exporter, and if the other states started to elect trade barriers to the state of Wyoming, and they said, sorry, we don't want your coal, we're going to try and run our expensive wind or something like that. I don't think that benefits the world. I don't think it benefits Wyoming. I think wherever the energy is the best energy, best extraction technology, and I think that should be shared around the world. I think that production is good. I think we should increase production, but that was my thinking on energy independence.
Thank you.
Thank you. Because now it's time for concluding remarks. As the late George Harrison wrote, all things must pass, so you will all have 1 minute to make your closing remarks. And Senator Barrasso, we will begin with you.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks to the audience and all of you. I would say that running for the U.S. Senate is it's like applying for a job. It's a jobs application. And what I've been doing is traveling around asking people to interview me for the job. And I listen to people in Wyoming, and they know what works. And it's low taxes, it's reasonable regulations, and it's living within our means, a balanced budget, which is what we do every year in Wyoming. The U.S. needs that balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Ronald Reagan said you can't be for big government and big taxes and big bureaucracy and still be for the little guy. I'm for people all around the state of Wyoming. I go to the Centennial Ranch celebration in Wyoming. These are families that have been in business for over 100 years, and they've done it in ways that, they've been through floods and droughts and everything, and then the president says, if you have a business, you didn't build it. Well, Mr. President, those people did build that business. But I'll tell you, I'm very grateful to the people of Wyoming for allowing me to represent them. And my dad was one of these guys, World War II, Battle of the Bulge. From the time I was a little kid, he'd say, John, you should thank God every day you live in America. You don't know how fortunate you are. We're very fortunate, and I want to thank you for allowing me to be here this evening.
Mr. Otto.
Yeah, I just want to say again, I'm really glad to be here. I'm really happy to be hearing these ideas from John and from Tim, and the audience is great. I have to say, I get asked, why am I running? What's the difference? For me, I say there's a big difference. When I entered the world of politics, like I say, there's taking and there's taxing and there's jail, and that's how it's done. Even to the school, that's how schools are funded. And so I think that I'm seeing these politicians, and they talk, and they don't seem to notice that. And I think it's really important in politics that we say, before we do this thing with the government, we should say, do we want to do this way? Do we really want to do it this way? And anything that we can do voluntarily, cooperatively, that's a success. And anything we can't, it's a failure to some extent. But I mean, we do need the government to do these things. We need security. But I just want to say that's why I feel like I'm the different candidate, and I don't think we're hearing that elsewhere.
Mr. Chesnut, I think you're going to get the last word.
Great. I think it's the way Washington's working right now, it's a broken system. There is no such thing as compromise there. I think the two sides are so polar and not working together that there needs to be someone bringing a fresh approach to that. I think since, like I said earlier, since Senator Simpson and Senator Kennedy were there weren't people there that were willing to bring compromise. And I think that is what's being lost right now. I hope that's something I can bring to it. I think we in Wyoming can show the rest of the world how politics works better. We see the three guys up here. We all get along. We're going to leave her. We're going to shake hands. We're going to smile and still be friends. And I think that's something that Wyoming can show the rest of the world, that politics works here where it's not working in Washington.
And you left some time over, so good for you.
Thank you very much.
But of course, that is all the time we have for this U.S. Senate debate. Our thanks to the candidates, our guest journalists, and of course, you, our viewers. Stay tuned for our Decision 2012 U.S. House debate. But first, this look at the ballot measures awaiting you when you go to the polls on Tuesday.